gentlemen and wormhole wanderers, get ready for the creepiest, crawlingest, brutalest, brawlingest night of time-tripping terror you've ever laid ears on. In this corner, a time-tested tale of star-crossed almost lovers, Twilight Zone, and the challenger proving time travel rules of our sweater-loving suckers. Are you afraid of the dark? This is Put Up Your Spooks! This week's theme...
Time Teens. I'm Jeff, representing the 80s.
And I'm Ryan, swinging through those 90s.
So Ryan, it's our anniversary episode. It's been almost a full year since we've recorded an episode.
Oh, so it's our almost anniversary episode. We were stuck in a time warp with some time teens.
So the theme I have selected is time loop, time warp, sort of time travel-y stuff. And we kind of settled on a really good match.
Yeah, I think you're right. It does match quite well.
My episode is the 1980s Twilight Zone series, A Message from Charity. So we begin in 1700 with a teenage girl, Charity Payne, who is gripped in the throes of a fever. And she's rambling about this terrible thunder, even though the nurse says that the skies are clear. But through Charity's eyes, we see this bitchin' Mustang roaring down the road. And this is actually on a TV screen near another sick person, Peter Wood, who is experiencing a similar fever in the far-off year of 1985. Incredibly, Peter's doctor says,
bacterial infection caused by stagnant water, inadequate drain-off.
Yes, I remember my mother telling me about a similar outbreak when she was a girl.
Yeah. These things come in cycles sometimes. But this particular strain is a stubborn cuss. It's cropped up hereabouts in some form or another ever since colonial days.
So Peter Wood and Charity Payne both live in the same town, and they're both infected by the same recurring bacteria. So after the fever passes, the teenagers learn that their minds are still connected, and Peter's a lonely nerd, and this is the best thing that has ever happened to him. So at first Charity's like, you're the devil, I'll not listen to you. But he pretty quickly convinces her that the 80s are totally rad, and he spends his days in hedonistic bliss, allowing Charity to experience things like chocolate ice cream and 3-ply toilet paper.
And washing the car in 3-ply toilet paper. I was just waiting for her to start like puking her guts out after, because like it cuts to him on sitting in his room and his bed is covered in just empty junk food containers.
Covered in junk food, yeah.
So I like really wanted to cut back to colonial times and have her just like just ralphing up a storm.
Or going into a diabetic coma or something.
Yeah.
He goes outside and he's staring at a plane, and she can see and experience everything that he sees and experiences.
It's a tough sell because sometimes they can see what the other person is seeing, sometimes they can't, sometimes they can taste what the other's seeing, sometimes they can hear what the other's hearing, or taste what the other's tasting. So the rules were kind of unclear, and they kind of went back and forth, and it's hard to kind of picture what it looks like. Like, are they seeing double? Is she seeing what she sees and what he sees, and vice versa?
Yeah, they're having conversations while, like, he's washing the car, and she'll be, like, washing the laundry and, like, hanging it up on the line. But they're both, like, walking around with their eyes open, but also sharing. Maybe there's, like, we're on a Google Meet right now. Maybe it's, like, a picture-in-picture.
Oh, man, yeah. He's got a little heads up.
Yeah.
It's an AR overlay.
Yeah. But he's watching a plane fly overhead, and she's like, I find it hard to believe that that's not a strange bird. You say it's a carriage in the sky. I think a plane would have freaked her the fuck out. That would have been the first FFO. Or at least the second FFO.
Well, all of it probably should have had her cowering in a pool of her own filth.
Especially since they do live in olden times where fear of witchcraft is rampant. So back to our story. Charity is trying to school her friend Ursula on what the future might hold, but Ursula is frightened of such devilish things. It's deviltry. She knows it's deviltry because even the livestock were affected, which makes me think that the cows and horses in the 1700s were mind swapping with the cows and horses from 1985. And
Most
I don't know
definitely.
if they're like,
Moo?
just still grass.
Moo.
Nay. So Ursula gets freaked out and runs away. And the next time we see Peter, who I should add is only 16 years old, he's at a restaurant just slugging down wine.
Well, his dad
And-
does say, "Don't tell your mother."
And Charity gets totally turned.
Charity, what is wrong with thee?
Wrong? What could be wrong?
I knew thou wert not quite well yet. Just a fever coming back.
Sorry, Father, I feel fine.
And she's like, no. There's just this lonely nerd in the 1980s who's sending me psychic messages. And he's like, oh, shit. But they don't have time to worry about that because the motherfucking Witchfinder General shows up. And he wants to give Charity a very up-close and personal examination. But Charity's father, James Cromwell, he ain't having any of that. So he goes beast mode and just thrashes this group of pilgrims. But one of them gets lucky and lays him out with an axe handle to the head. So Charity's taken someplace private, and the Witchfinder General wants to lift up her bloomers and look for the devil's mark. But Charity's not down with that, so she runs off into the woods. And Peter is like, yeah, maybe it was not the best idea to let this girl in the 1700s live so deliciously. He's like, okay, let's go to the library. I'm sure they'll have something about the witch trials here, and maybe I can find out what happens. He doesn't find any info on Charity, but he does find some damning information on the Witchfinder General. He finds out that guy was posthumously convicted for killing 2 sailors and swiping their gold. So he sets a plan. Charity submits to a witchcraft trial, and when she's asked about the things she sees, she starts going on about these bodies of these missing sailors, and they're actually buried nearby. And the Witchfinder's like, well, I think we've all heard enough. Clearly, this is a second sight given by God, just like my old granddad had, and everyone here knows that there was not a woman more saintly than my grandma. I think I said granddad, but, you get the point. So, Witchfinder General hypes up the crowd.
I would say he overhypes them. They're like, "Oh yeah, we agree," and then he keeps going. I was like, "Shit, he's gonna talk himself right back into witchcraft if he doesn't shut up soon."
It's kind of his gig.
He's
He can't help
just
himself.
enjoying it.
Yeah, people are like, all right, she has a second sight, big deal. And he's like, yeah, he just goes off. So she's declared innocent. She and James Cromwell head on home, and it seems like a happy ending. But then Charity friend zones Peter from 1700, and it's totally brutal. She's like, well, our plan worked brilliantly, and I now have a powerful person who will stick up for my innocence, but just in case I have any trouble ever again, I'm going to close this psychic connection. Sorry, Peter, you're a loser. And even in the 1700s, I'd rather die of dysentery than listen to your nerdly prattling. And so Peter goes back to school because he's still got another few years of high school.
But then becomes a totally cool dude.
I
Full of
think
confidence.
he gains a little confidence.
Talks to people.
He actually talks to people. He gets one final psychic message from Charity. She says, go find a message that I've left for you by Bear Rock. And he goes down and sees a tree, and it's been carved with a heart and their initials, the end.
She carved it into the rock. Were you paying attention?
No, there's a tree stump next to the rock.
I think she carved it into the rock.
Carved into the very living rock?
Yeah, otherwise how would it have survived? He would never
Oh.
have seen that 200 years hence.
I thought it was a tree trunk.
Let's go to the tape. He moves some reeds aside, and then there's, pure granite.
Okay. For some reason, that looked like a tree stump to me.
Total knockout.
Winner. Ryan, the good thing about you working from home now is that you can actually half watch a video out of the corner of your eye on a full screen as opposed to watching it at work minimized. So I don't know, man. What do you think about this episode?
You know, I am learning that, having only watched two 1980s Twilight Zones, it seems to be a very soft-edged, low-stakes. I mean, she was going to get accused of witchcraft, which is pretty high stakes, but the pacing and the plotting are not like high energy in both episodes that we've watched, and I don't mind that at all. It's just surprising to me.
Yeah, when you think Twilight Zone, you think edgy with a twist, right?
Yeah.
I agree. Both episodes we've watched have been pretty light and airy. The last one was Time and Teresa Golowitz. Another time travel.
Time teens.
Another time teens.
Maybe she thought it was the deviltry, but right off the bat, Peter is like in. He just accepts it immediately. He's like, this is my time pen pal. We're talking. We're friends. There's nothing weird going on here whatsoever.
Well, it's the only friend he's ever had, and it's a pretty girl. So, I mean, he's loving it.
Yeah.
Right? And he gets to be like the smart future guy, right? He's not like, oh, I'm overwhelmed by all this crazy stuff. He's like, oh, yeah, here's some chocolate ice cream.
Let me tell you that.
Yeah, exactly.
But he never asked her to open a bank account in his name, I suppose.
Exactly. And that's...
He's a hero, a true hero.
That's the one note not the one note, but that's maybe the most important note I had. Like, there's not a lot he can do for her. You know, maybe he can do some deep historic research and be like, okay, there's going to be a drought in the next year, so you want to save up some fucking potatoes. But she could put a little money in an interest-bearing account for him, and he'd have millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Or she could just take some common items that are going to become priceless antiques and just like put them in the wall of her barn or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, bank probably wouldn't be the way to go, because without FDIC, those banks probably would have failed before he could get to them. So
I think you could really work that connection backwards in time, whereas I don't think she had the resources or the mobility or the means to really exploit knowledge of the future, Back to the Future 2 style. You know, it's not like she was gambling on the stock market or sports almanac or something, you know?
He could have helped her to...
I mean, she probably died toothless in childbirth.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, he could have, helped her discover, like, what kind of plants would be, like, really good.
But he may not know what kind of plants would be.
But he has a whole library at his disposal.
True. So Peter claims that, like, it had to have happened the way it happened. I think at some point she questions all this. And he's like, no, this is the way it happens because it's in this book. He's sort of, in essence, arguing that no matter what she does, it's not going to have upstream time effects, meaning that these are all fixed points in time, and that this was always meant to happen, and they are in a predestined time loop. I mean, they both move into the future, but like that moment, they were always traveling back and forth. I thought that was interesting. What I also thought was interesting was this was some down-home, old-timey colonial Massachusetts shit.
Hell yeah.
And I got to ask you, as our resident masshole, is there an Anniston? Is there a Harmon Brook?
Never heard of it.
Oh, man, they got wiped out in the time storm.
Well, I still have notes about watching the show. Peter was played by Kevin from Masters of the Universe, which I was pretty excited about.
I knew you would be.
The Dolph Lundgren version. On the cutting room floor is hours and hours of them masturbating together.
I mean...
In the very beginning, they were, like, stroking each other's sheets and stuff, and they were like, oh, so soft. And they kept having loving close-ups of their hands, and I was like, oh, here it comes.
So a note about that. This episode is based on a short story by William M. Lee.
Huh.
And in the original story, Peter is still 16, but Charity is 11.
Oh my God in heaven.
So the screenwriter was like, this is going to be creepy. They're both 16. The really, like, freaky thing, the really, like, mind-blowing sci-fi about this episode is that there's a bacteria in Massachusetts that has been connecting brains. I mean, presumably they're not the first people this has ever happened to. If this bacteria has been present and causing fevers for hundreds of years,
could be responsible for all the witch killings.
Yeah. In the original screenplay for this, the producers wanted Peter to be like much more interested in 1980s pop culture, and I just wonder what that would have been like.
Just Cyndi Lauper and Sting and
Captain Lou Albano
Footloose.
and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he was like showing Charity Teen Wolf, and she was freaking out. But instead, they're like, yeah, we're not going to go the easy route. We're actually going to make him like a nerd who reads Shakespeare, and we want to sort of capitalize on this Romeo and Juliet star-crossed lovers situation.
That was a good choice, I think, because they had to have something that they could connect over. Like if they were just two aliens, then they wouldn't have.
If they had nothing in common,
right.
he would be like, books, what are those?
Yeah.
This whole episode just seemed so up your alley. I just imagined you like weeping and tearing your clothes.
Well, it wasn't
wearing your tricorn hat.
Yeah, maybe it would have really hit me in my younger years before I became embittered. Because like I used to love Roswell when I was in my late teens, early 20s.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, there's star-crossed love, and then I tried to go back and watch it as a slightly older man, and I was like, oh god. So, but I don't know. I don't think they really. I mean, I never felt like they were like destined to be together, or it wasn't like heartrending when they said goodbye and stuff like that.
So after the trial, where Charity sort of uses her future knowledge to blackmail the Witchfinder General, it would have been really funny if they had cut back to Peter's time, and if he had been like half robot, or there were like dinosaurs running around, like she completely destroyed the time stream.
Yes. That would have been more Twilight Zone.
Yes, that would have, some kind of butterfly effect
Yeah.
would have been hilarious if it was totally saccharine sweet and low stakes up until that point. And then he opens a portal to her time, and like a bunch of Terminators come out or some shit.
Like the bacteria would have evolved and like grown and become multicellular organisms, but they still have their time travel ability.
In an Edge of Tomorrow, live, die, repeat situation.
Yeah. My final note on this episode is that once upon a time, James Cromwell said hi to me.
What?
The end.
Go on.
I was working at Columbia Pictures, and I was making some photocopies, and he walked by the copier room, and he said, hi. And I said, hi. And it was the greatest moment of my life.
That's pretty awesome. Cromwell's the man.
Yeah, he was a good guy. And then he went to the executives, the high-powered executives, and he said, hey, I'm Jimmy Cromwell. And I was like, man, what a guy.
Jimmy Croms.
You find something amusing?
Juxtaposed against your time teens are my very own time teens from Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of the Long Ago Locket.
I'm going to jump in and stop you right there. This is my earliest jump in, and I hate to slow your roll, but avid listeners of our show will know how we talk about the production mandate that you don't show how fire is created on the show. They're always doing sort of very confusing things with fire and extinguishing fire and rubbing sticks together. Like, they're never going to show these kids how to start a fire. And I realized that this goes all the way back to the opening credits of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
They don't even show you
The
striking
hand
them.
holds up a match, and the match just ignites itself. They don't even show it striking a match.
Anyway, so yeah, Frank, we're watching all of these out of order, but Frank is just scamming on salmon. Salmon scamming.
And run a scam on Sam.
He just can't stop. Can't stop running those Sam scams. And that's all I'll say about the Midnight Society. So, Jimmy is a high schooler and played by one of my favorites, Will Friedle of Boy Meets World fame. So Jimmy walks home through the park after school and finds a knife on the ground. As he picks it up, a hand reaches out from the bushes and grabs his arm. So he screams comically and runs away, but he does see a mysterious figure darting through the trees. In his normal life of non-knife grabbing, Jimmy is obsessed with this girl, April, but he's too scared to talk to her because he's a lonely nerd, even though he's the cool, awesome Will Friedle. Except when he does talk to her immediately and ask her out to go ice skating, but is then further immediately cock-blocked by their mutual friend. He was almost there. He's like, hey, you want to go skating? And then the other guy's like, Fountain of Blood, Part 4, or whatever, some other movie that they want to see.
Tower of Blood, Part 4.
I'll leave. I'll just go. So he walks away, goes home, and he's like walking around kissing couples and...
He's walking around couples who are kissing. He's not walking around kissing couples.
that's a good bit of writing knowledge. Got to watch out how you structure those sentences.
Exactly. That's a freebie from me to you.
And he goes back, of course, through the park, and he sees the mysterious stranger kind of running through the woods again. And contrary to his timid nature, he's like, "Hey, who the fuck are you, huh? Hey, oh, you're not gonna scare me this time." He goes and chases him through the woods, showing that he does have the confidence inside him. He just needs to figure out how to unleash it. And chases the guy down, and the guy grabs him and says, "Which way to Harrisville?" His clothes are all old-timey. And before he can give him directions, they're set upon by some redcoats. Some genuine redcoats. And they chase them through the woods, and but not before the guy somehow gets 2 shots off from his muzzle-loading rifle.
People skilled with muzzle loaders could shoot like...
He reloaded in 2 seconds.
Not 2 seconds, but like a shot a minute or more. Seriously, I mean,
well,
it seems impossible now in retrospect.
I guess, but then they do get away only because the redcoats have to stop to reload.
Right, which they would have to do.
Yeah, but the redcoats catch up anyway, and they're about to bayonet Jimmy, and so he cowers in fear, but then he hears a sweet voice saying,
"Jimmy, what are you doing?"
And it's just April and her friends, and he makes some excuse about looking for his contact lens, but finds this like brass button in the grass and says that he found it, and then they all head off.
What was crazy was he was so committed to the bit that he put the brass button in his eye.
He just stuck it right in it. Well, yeah, I was kind of picturing from their angle, like them seeing him holding the brass button and saying, "I found it," and it's just like this solid brass object, and being like really freaked out. Some kind of cosplay contact lens or something.
Yeah, steampunk contact lens.
So he takes it to an antique dealer, of course, who tells him it's an 18th century button from a Minuteman uniform. And he tells Jimmy that the Battle of Harrisville went right through the park. But the button is kind of weird because it looks brand new.
If I didn't know better, I'd say a Minuteman had worn this very day.
I did a little bit of research, and I was surprised to find that the revolutionaries in America did invade Quebec in 1775, and they got trounced.
Huh. So, let me see. Jimmy, April, and cock-blocking guy, who does have a name, although I forget it. They only say it once. They're all playing Frisbee in the park, and Jimmy overthrows by 10,000 miles. And is
Look, it wasn't just Frisbee, it was an aerobie.
It was one of those.
You try not throwing an aerobie for 1,000 yards.
So he's like, go on to the cafe without me. You guys can continue to get to know each other better whilst I pine from the shadows. And he goes off to the woods and hears the sounds of battle, guns firing and horses trotting along. The redcoats see him and ride him down as a traitor spy. They corner him and are about to hang him by the neck until dead when the Minuteman comes and saves his life. He explains, so this is the really funny part, he explains he needs to get to Harrisville desperately, not because he has some vital information for the rebellion, not because he needs to get to a battle there, but because he's got a sweetie there that he really needs to talk to, because he wasn't able to tell her he loved her, and she's about to marry some royal ugly dude.
No way!
Yeah, I really kind of threw my hands up at this point with this episode. I mean, this episode was terrible already, but then to find out that the spy had no mission that had anything to do with redcoats or anything. And it was just that he didn't have the guts to tell some chick that he loved her.
So you have to make the connection to the modern day story, and Jimmy has to be able to learn a lesson.
Right, but if he had said, like, I wasn't able to commit to my betrothed or the woman I love because I have this important mission. But if you can bring her this locket, she'll know and she'll wait for me.
Yeah. So anyway, the Minuteman gives Jimmy his knife to bind their friendship and tells him that it's the year 1780. And then the redcoats find them and they split up and run. Goes right back to the antique store and the dealer tries to lowball him for that mint condition antique knife. Jimmy's like, nah. But he pumps the guy for info about the name on the knife handle, Lieutenant William. And the dealer's like, well, that reminds me of a young Lieutenant William from 1760 that I know all about, 1780. And he was captured. He gives him a book where he reads all about, he's in class reading the book about Lieutenant William, who was captured and hung as a spy in 1780 on that very day, I think, because he looks at the calendar and it's the same day. So he asks to be excused from class, and the teacher's like, why? He's like, a friend needs help. But I think he should have said he had diarrhea or something like that.
Yeah, but didn't want to say that in front of April.
Yeah, so he just sits there in class until the bell rings. And afterwards, April confronts him. She's, worried about him. He tells them everything about the Minuteman and the Redcoats and all that stuff, and they don't really believe him. But the cock-blocking guy lets him borrow a boombox because Jimmy has a plan. So in the park, the Redcoats are just about to string William up, but it's weird because he's also tied to the tree. And
he's it's very, very silly.
So Jimmy blasts the boombox off in the distance, which distracts them long enough for him to cut Lieutenant William loose, and they bayonet the shit out of the boombox and then chase Jimmy and William down.
I thought it would have been hilarious if the Redcoats' heads had exploded like in Tale of the Hatching.
What is this deviltry? He's a witch.
Rock and roll! Oh, my British bones!
So he tells William how to get to Harrisville, and then he leads the Redcoats away, and then April's there, and she's like, hi! And she's waving, and he's like, run! Get the fuck out! Redcoats! And he tackles her to the ground, and then they look up, and it's just like this dressage rider in a red coat doing a little horseback riding in the park, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry. But April just has, a few shattered ribs, but no big deal. And so after, living through that entire ordeal, Jimmy finally has the courage to just tell April how he feels. And he shows her the knife, and she actually sees the inscription on the knife change from Lieutenant William to Captain William, which I've never thought about this before, but I was like, wait a minute. A, Lieutenant William gave Jimmy his knife, so he wouldn't have had it to change the inscription. And B, he would have been promoted to captain after escaping from the Redcoats, so did the knife somehow get reforged and reinscribed as captain?
And then re-given.
To
the boy. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
It makes no sense, and I never noticed it before. But at least there's an inscription to tie back to your episode. But then Jimmy finds the locket on the ground. The locket that Lieutenant William was going to give to his sweetie. And he gives it to her, and then they fall in love and live happily ever after.
As for Jimmy and April, well, I'll let you figure that one out for yourselves.
April should be terrified of Jimmy because he has been acting like a sweaty, raving maniac.
Quite erratic.
For days. And then she's finally alone in the woods with him, and he pulls out a knife. He's like, oh, look at this.
Yeah.
And then she's like, oh, okay, you have a knife. And then he walks over, he sees a locket on the ground. In the dirt, picks up this dirty locket that has two random people in it, and he puts it around her neck. April is not very choosy.
You know what? That's just destiny.
She's only got eyes for Jimmy.
She's attracted to his aloof mystery.
What the hell was going on in this episode? Because the spy soldier was supposed to die. So if you see him, it's either you've traveled in time or he's a ghost.
Right.
Maybe he's got unfinished business, but Jimmy saves his life, so he never died, so he's not a ghost. And just because he had unfinished business, but there's also a bunch of redcoats there.
Right. So this is why I think he's not seeing like ghosts or shades of the past, because he gets the button and the knife and the locket, and they're all in pristine condition, which I think lends credence to the whole time warp, time travel scenario.
So what is causing this time loop? Is it just
that's the only problem. Yeah, there's no catalyst for the time loop.
Right. Is this just a spot in the woods that
has temporal
has a
properties?
Natural, yeah. He went into these woods and got blipped.
They blipped in 1919.
Yeah, I was surprised by your episode that they didn't, run that guy down. But she was just like, I know of a certain someone who killed 2 people, wink, wink. And then that was it. I was like, shit, that guy's not getting any comeuppance for killing 2 sailors and stealing their gold.
And molesting a bunch of girls, yeah, claiming that they're witches. I wonder if that was a nod to keeping the time stream
I suppose.
The same, because in any other story, she'd be like, I think the magistrate should look in your basement and they're going to find dead bodies. But that wouldn't necessarily clear her of witchcraft or second sight.
But she has second sight, but she's nae a witch. But she does have second sight. But my grandmother had second sight. That reminds me of a story about my third cousin. He was also second-sighted, but he was a witch. Anyway, let her go.
Time to shrew, kryptonite, not applicable.
Nope.
Body count for both, 0. Scare factor, shock factor, zip.
0.
Gross factor for Twilight Zone, you have the pervy witchfinder. It's a little gross.
Give it a 10%.
Yeah.
But he wasn't even that pervy, and he didn't have like boils or anything.
True. I mean, pretty light sauce for one of our shows. What the factor for Twilight Zone? I'm gonna say there was a bit of what the factor trying to figure out how the transtemporal brain bacteria bridge worked.
Yeah.
But it didn't really derail the show.
No.
Whereas in Tale of the Lost Locket, it just didn't. The fact that the spy's mission had nothing to do with getting to Harrisburg.
So what the factor was off the charts?
Think factor, 0 for
0.
both. Theme of time teens. I'm giving that to Twilight Zone. The main characters were teens.
Yeah.
Both times.
Yeah, the Minuteman, we don't know how old he was, but he probably wasn't a teen.
No, he seemed to be a much older guy.
He was an old man at 22.
Yeah, exactly. A grizzled old 22-year-old. Totally 80s for Twilight Zone.
0. There was no pop culture whatsoever.
You know, you got the teens in the high school. You get a little bit of rock and roll, but
he was just wearing like normal sweaters and slacks.
I wouldn't even say normal. I would say they kind of went out of their way to make him a very studious, not very cultural. So low for 80s. Except that it was important that it was the 1700s and the 1980s.
Why?
For plot reasons, it was important that one person was in the year 1985 and the other person in the 1700s.
He could have also been in 1920 or...
That's true.
But
any other time. Wasn't. No. He was in 1985.
He was in 1985.
Or present day. Hella 90s.
I would say probably not a lot, except for the high jeans. That's about it. And those are back, so that could have taken place today.
So we have a tie.
Draw!
What would you do in this scenario? You find out that you've been infected with a bacteria that connects your brain to someone in the past.
Well, with my luck, I would have been connected to the judge.
I must search your body for witch marks. Take off thy frock.
You could develop a relationship, or you could try some time shenanigans, but you've also got the idea that there is bacteria that can be harvested.
You need to study that bacteria.
You got to study that bacteria because, archaeologists could unlock the secrets of the past, or would it be like something, Stranger Things style that's snapped up by some secret government agency that is like spying on the past?
Yeah, and then they would have tried to boost its effects, and then we would have gotten super corona time bacteria.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting that, it was a bunch of people kind of waylaid by this cyclical bacteria. In Peter's time, 1985, they have much better water filtration.
Right.
So maybe a few kids on his street.
He's got to find those other kids. They can form a whole society.
But again, being aware of what a commoner was aware of in the 1700s may not yield much value.
It's what you make of it. Also, baiting.
Now take off thy frock, I command it.
Say, Jeff, well, restrictions have lifted, but...
Yeah, you want to get together for like a in-person record?
I mean, people are a lot less careful now, so are you feeling okay? Like, I'm still worried about...
Yeah, I'm okay. I mean, I've just got, a little bit of fever. I don't know, it's weird. It's like I can hear the thoughts of a lonely teenage nerd from the 1980s.
Those are just your thoughts.
Rerun for your lives.